Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CLSR. And I want to talk about that thing, that green thing, that cannabis, that smoke that you toke that might make you choke. But it's no joke. It's become commonplace. It seems like countries are loosening their laws, allowing people to smoke up till they fill their cup. And the truth be told, it's a drug. But I think what we need to do is talk about this cannabis because there's different strains out there and many different people are having the opportunity to pick it up and saying it's less harmful. However, I do have to let you know that the more information you know about it, the better you can understand it. I mean, a lot of times marijuana is referenced to more harsh drugs like cocaine and heroin and molly and meth, and so it's not considered as harmful. And in many cases, it may not be, but it really depends on the individual. So I think it's worth taking a look at cannabis. I mean, there are different names for this cannabis, like marijuana, weed, pot, bud, green, herb, or flower, right? Hash extracts, honey oil, phoenix tears, shatter, edibles. Like, really, what is this thing? What is this plant that we got going on? What is this thing that people desire that they call fire? Like, where does it come from? What is it? Well, see, cannabis is a product of the cannabis sativa plant that is used for its psychoactive and therapeutic effects. And it comes in many forms, including as dried flowers and leaves, hash extracts such as oil, like honey oil, phoenix tears, and shatter, as I mentioned, and edibles like candy, butter, or baked goods. See, cannabis contains hundreds of chemical substances, more than 100 chemicals called cannabinoids, or shall I say cannabinoids, which have been identified as specific to the cannabis plant. THC, right, is the main psychoactive cannabinoid and is most responsible for the high associated with cannabis use. Another cannabinoid is cannabidiol, which is cannabis oil, like CBD, and it has little or no psychoactive effects. So you do not feel high. CBD counteracts some of the negative effects of THC. Like, where does this stuff come from? The cannabis sativa plant is native to tropical and temperature climates, but is cultivated around the world. Let me say that it's cultivated around the world. And what does it look like for those people who have probably never seen it? Cannabis is this dried flowered buds and leaves of this cannabis plant. Its color ranges from like a grayish green to a like greenish brown and may contain seeds and stems. Hash is the dried compressed resin of cannabis flower buds. It ranges in color from brown to black and it is sold in chunks. Oil is made by boiling cannabis flower buds or resin in an organic solvent, which produces a sticky reddish brown or green substance. See, the THC content of each variety of cannabis varies. Although hash is generally more potent than the plant, and oil is usually the most potent form of cannabis. And I'll say that again, oil is usually the most potent form of cannabis. Cannabis can be used in many different ways, like it may be rolled into a cigarette called a joint, mixed with and rolled into a joint called a spliff, or packed into a pipe or bong and then smoked. Cannabis can also be vaped. The extracts, like such as oil or shatter, are often dabbed with an oil rig pipe called a dab rig. Cannabis may also be used as an ingredient in food. And so we'd have to wonder, what kind of foods? Well, a number of foods out there. Baked goods, people put it in their salads, people even have a drink. It's just amazing how many uses it can be used for. Um, There are approximately what 3.6 million Canadians who use cannabis, and I'd have to say that there are much more than that. However, that's what it's really saying. But I'd say that 24% of those 3.6 million people use it for medical reasons. Now, there are many people who use cannabis, but how it affects them may depend on how much you use, how often, and how long you've used it, whether you smoke it, vape, or eat it, your mood, your expectations in the environment you're in, your age, whether you have certain pre existing medical or psychiatric conditions, whether you've taken any alcohol or other drugs like illegal prescriptions, over the counter, or herbal. People can have very different experiences with cannabis, and some may feel relaxed, lively, talkative, giggly, and even euphoric, while others feel tense, anxious, fearful, and confused. The kind of experience you may have can vary from one drug taking episode to another, usually because of the amount taken, the method used, and the frequency of regular cannabis use. See, there are physical effects to cannabis use, which many of you know about. You don't even need me to tell you, but I'll tell you anyway. You get those red eyes, the dry mouth and throat, irritated respiratory system from smoking it, increases in appetite and heart rate, decreases in blood pressure, balance, and stability, drowsiness or restlessness, depending on the amount taken in an individual response to this drug. However, the therapeutic uses of cannabis are associated with its ability to regulate and be managed. Like, people who have nausea, they might take it for chemotherapy patients, to help them with this nausea. And to help people with their appetite, people who have cancer, HIV, or AIDS might take this to help them with their cancer, their pain, that they might be going through, you know what I mean, as well as the appetite. But strictly, it could be for people who have multiple sclerosis or cancer related pain or chronic pain. It could be just for pain. People who have depressed mood and insomnia use weed, right? They might have it for some chronic diseases. You know what I'm saying? And the feeling of marijuana can depend upon the person, right? See, like when cannabis is smoked or vaped, the effect is almost immediate and may last several hours, depending on how much it is taken. When it is swallowed, the effect is felt in and about an hour and lasts longer than when it is smoked. Although the high lasts only a few hours after smoking, the THC is stored in fat cells and expelled from the body over a period of days or weeks. This is why drug tests for cannabis use can give a positive result long after the effects have worn off. So you need to consider that. Like if you are going out there and you're going to drive, if you get pulled over and if it's in your blood, just like alcohol, you're either going to get fined or arrested. So you need to consider that. Or if you have a job and you're getting tested on your job, you need to know that if you're smoking the day before, there might be some THC in your system. And if the expectation is that you have to be totally clear of having that marijuana in your system, then you can lose your job. Now, there's a lot of organizations who aren't enforcing too much on pre screening, but you could see this could be part of the future if we have some problems out there, as time goes on. I mean, would you really want a train engineer to be high when they're responsible for 1,000 people to get from Montreal to maybe Toronto, right? And they're high? Nah, you don't really want that. So sometimes you have to have some screening in place or a pilot. Do you really want a pilot to be screened? A lot of us will put our hands up. But see, it wouldn't just apply to engineers or pilots. It might have to go across the board. It might have to go into every workplace eventually. You got to get screened. It really depends on how this marijuana regulation is being monitored and how often people are using and how it impacts the workplace. But this could take some time. Keeping this in mind, we'd have to wonder, is this thing addictive? People who use cannabis regularly can develop a psychological or mild dependence. People with psychological dependence may be preoccupied with using cannabis, and if they can't get it, they feel anxious. After regularly using cannabis for a long period of time, people can develop a physical dependence. If they stop using, they may experience mild withdrawal. Symptoms can include irritability, anxiety, upset stomach, loss of appetite, sweating, and disturbed sleep. These symptoms generally last for about a week, but sleep problems may continue longer. And there has been a question out there on how dangerous cannabis could be. Well, those who use cannabis should be aware of the health risks and take measures to avoid them. Like, think about it. Cannabis used by people on a regular, heavily, or regularly, they could have problems with thinking, memory, or physical coordination. Like if you know of some people who smoke marijuana and they start a conversation, and in the middle of their conversation they just totally lose their train of thought. Well, this is an indication that something could be wrong for the future, people. See, it might just be slight now, but as time goes on, how's that going to impact your mind? And you got to ask yourself, do you want to start losing your thoughts midway? And if this thing is having that effect on you, what do you think might happen? Now, I'm not getting into the research right now, but I'm saying there could be problems with thinking and memory and the physical coordination, impairment, which can lead to serious injuries, including those from car accidents, hallucinations such as seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, or feeling things that do not really exist. And I know some of you are like, I never really experienced that, but some people do. Mental health problems, specifically if you or an immediate family member has had a mental health issue like psychosis or an addiction to alcohol or other drugs, this is could be problematic. And cannabis dependence. You can become cannabis dependent. You know, breathing or lung problems may occur from smoking. Cancer from smoking. You can catch it. That's a big thing. They're like, oh, you can only catch. There have some people been out there, and I'd say the majority of people would say, oh, you know what, you can't catch cancer from marijuana because you catch cancer from cigarettes. You can get cancer from smoking. So if you're smoking marijuana, you can still catch cancer, right? You're going to have those breathing problems I told you. Problems during or after pregnancy may occur, especially if cannabis is smoked. And if you have problems with cannabis, and I know that some of you just say, oh, cannabis is so harmless that people overdo it when it comes to cannabis. There's overemphasis on it. Well, cannabis has a lot of great qualities about it, and there are more to be discovered. But also, there are children, if you go to some of those hospitals, go to some of those emergency rooms. There are some kids that smoke too much and get too high and they end up in the hospital and they have problems with it. Nobody's going to tell you that. The only way you're going to know is going to your statistics. Let's say if you go to Statistics Canada, you want to find out some more about incidents happening out there. Go and find out what's really going on. You'll learn a lot. You're going to learn a lot about who's using what age group, what demographic. Do you understand? But there are ways that you could deal with this cannabis if it becomes too much. There's treatments out there. And where can you get this support? Well, you're going to have to contact your family physician. You know what I mean? Make sure you get some resources. Go to your community centers. Get some pamphlets if you need to. There's police stations. There's health centers. If you want to know where to get some support, you can go to these agencies and ask. Or you could go online, do your research. Find out places that are available for you to get some support. Now, despite the fact that cannabis has been and is becoming more acceptable even here in North America, and even like the states seems to be loosening up. I know they just passed a federal law to support cannabis use and sales in each state. It's starting to really loosen up and become more commonplace. I do want to tell the people out there that you don't need to do cannabis if you don't want to. Just because other people are doing it doesn't mean that you should do it. I'm not advocating that you do any of the drugs. I just think information is power. And I think that and really believe that too many people aren't told that no, don't do drugs. Not enough. I think you don't have to. Just because a family member is doing it, you don't have to. And there are a lot of people that choose not to do any drugs because they're cool without it. And it doesn't mean that you're not cool because you're not doing drugs. It's you're being yourself, and you're not going to be popular in many circles for sure. And you're going to see family members telling you, oh, you know what, it's not even harmful, it's okay. But if you get high with marijuana and it doesn't feel right, you got to let it go. Just like alcohol, I don't think enough people realize because they feel that it's being pushed out there so much through the media. There's bars, restaurants, they're all serving up alcohol. They're still drugs. And I got to tell you, you don't need to use drugs at all. You can say no and stick to it. You'll be healthier, you'll be happier, you'll make informed decisions. Um, it's sad because a lot of times in this society we have to choose between our friends and some of these drugs, and a lot of us just go to our friends because it's so commonplace. However, you don't need to do that. You need to take care of yourself and understand what's good for you. And remember too what you are modeling. If you do have children and you start picking it up and your children are picking it up, and they're not managing it well, you got to look at yourself, which a lot of people don't want to do. The influence is big. So remember that if your kids are picking it up and they're not managing it well, and you're advocating, it's really not something that you really want to do. You got to look at it and say, well, what am I really doing? Am I being a positive influence or a negative influence? It's just like alcohol, just like any drug. Be careful what you model because you have young people out there and even your peers who are watching what you do. So if you can say no, it's better to start there. If you're not interested and you don't want to do it, start with the no. Say no, I'm just not about it. And that's okay. The more you say no, the better it is. And people will get to understand you and they'll realize that that's who you are. You're not into it, and that's okay. You can still live a really good life without any drugs or alcohol in your life at all. Matter of fact, you will live a much better life without any substance use at all. Seriously, you will. Now, if you need it for medical reasons because of some health concerns or cognitive difficulties you're experiencing or some psychological problems, then of course, if you have to use it, you have to. But you still got to be careful in its use. So I'm just saying that we have choices to make. And I think when young people are out there, they need to be shown and told, no, it's not good for you. Whether they're doing it or not, the drugs are not good for you. And it sounds like an old cliche, but they're just not good for you. You can find a lot of things in this world, and it's just not good for you. Is it terrible for you? Well, it really depends who you are, what you're dealing with. And like we all go through our ups and downs. And it's just important that we realize when we go through our ups and downs, when we just get on drugs or we resort to drugs, you know what I mean? Then it doesn't make the situation better. Matter of fact, it makes it worse. Especially if you're drinking, right? You're going through your mood swings, and it rarely makes the situation better. If anything, people just get on alcohol and they get into the state of mind where it becomes a coping strategy, and then it becomes abusive, and then it becomes dangerous and deadly. And I've seen what it can do. So I don't advocate for any drugs, period. But if you're going to do it, make sure you understand you have choice and that drugs are drugs, and one is definitely more potent than the other, but the impact that it can have on you in your life can be detrimental if you don't understand the ramifications of your actions. So I'm going to tell people, think about it. Think before you pick up a joint, or before you have somebody tell you how great it is, or if you get a laugh. See, when people get high, they talk about the high, but they don't talk about the low. So you get high and you go up, but it's when you come down, people never talk about, right? People never talk about the bad part of weed. They talk about the good. Oh, you get high, it's some good stuff, or it's, you know, but you got to be careful out there, especially if you're taking street drugs. Like, I'll be honest with you. I mean, with all the different drugs that are coming out there, it seems like we're going more into home based drugs. Not everybody, but there's a certain percentage of population that's getting into these drugs that you can make at home by mixing chemicals. And I'm concerned about that, and especially when it comes to weed. Like now, they have this weed that's not even weed, right? It's I can't even remember what it's called, but it's artificial weed, and it's they take these herbs, right? Could be oregano, or just they just take natural herbs and they spray it with this chemical, and apparently it gives the same THC effect that regular marijuana or cannabis has. So that's a little bit worrisome to me. And also, the government regulating it might be a better thing than just getting from the street. A lot of people say, "Oh, I get my stuff from the street and it's been okay for years." That's been okay for years, but as people get desperate for money and job loss, and they might be mixing it with chemicals, spraying it with chemicals. So you got to be careful where you're getting it from. So at least if you have it from a regulated body, then you might be aware of what's really in it. And I think in this day and age of information access, people could go on the internet and find chemicals that could mimic a certain highs, and they could add it to your drugs, and you just don't know. And if I sound a little over protective, too bad. Too bad. I should be, because we're living in a world of fake mobility, which means you don't know who's on the other side of that screen. Just like half the time you don't know what's coming in that bag of weed. And most people say, "Well, I grow my own." Good for you. But if you're not growing your own, which the majority of people aren't growing their own, they're getting it from somewhere. And people are doing some silly things for money these days, you know. And it's just like flavors. They can emulate flavors, natural flavors like banana, strawberry. You know what I'm talking about? They put it in our food. So I don't know about half the things that are out there that are coming from the street, but I do know a lot of it's very dangerous. And I'm learning more and more, and I think that it's important that we talk about it. We talk about these drugs that are becoming more popular and acceptable. See, alcohol, and this is a good thought. Think about this. Alcohol has been around for generations, okay? And when you think about the killing that alcohol has caused over the last century, people dying or losing family members because of alcohol consumption, it's nice for you to tell people, "Oh, it's just a part of society. It's become commonplace, and it's acceptable." And see, when it's being pushed in bars and restaurants, in the media, that it's become a part of our everyday life, it doesn't negate the fact that it has created a lot of harm out there. And I think what we think of most times is in isolation. We think that somebody's going to drink, but they're not going to do drugs. Well, a lot of people know that people who drink alcohol have a tendency to smoke cigarettes at the same time. Not all people, but a great percentage do. It's almost like a combo, like milk and cookies. Well, if they substitute those cigarettes for marijuana, then you got a double whammy on your hands, right? So alcohol is dangerous enough. In conjunction with any other drug, deadly. So I'm just saying we need to be cautious about what we're doing. And it appears that we're putting more drugs out there in those stores that we used to go to for simple shopping. And now it seems like our grocery stores, our big box stores, they have wine or alcohol in them just readily available. And I know the United States has had it going on for years where they've had liquor on every corner store. And as the years go on, it seems like alcohol is being less regulated and monitored. It's being put in the hands of our communities, especially here in Canada. They're loosening up. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. People go talk about responsible drinking. I get it. But having more access to it is not necessarily a good thing. And now, why do we say that? Like I said, the United States has had a lot of alcohol um, on corner stores, gas stations. It's just like ridiculous how much is out there, and it's a drug, and it's a potent drug. And I mean, I know of some alcohol that's called 151, and that's like 70% alcohol, which is ridiculous, but it's out there. But what I'm saying is, we have to be careful with what we put out there. And I think it's a good example to say United States has more incarcerated people than any other country. It leads in a lot of different ways. It leads in positive ways and negative ways. There's more incarcerated people there than probably most other countries combined. And it's sad. And I think it has a lot to do with the laws and the regulations. I think there's great parts to the United States, but there's also a lot to learn. And I don't think Canada is really learning. People say, oh, Canada is a lot different than the United States. However, I beg to differ. I think if your trading partner, three-quarters of your trade is going to the United States, and whenever they make a move, we have to make it too, then we should be a little bit worried on how we're operating. I mean, our prime minister here has to answer to the United States, believe it or not. And that's the position we find ourselves in. And I get a little bit worried when we start loosening up to the point where we're not monitoring things as much and our morality is starting to decrease or deteriorate. And I think that much of it is based on the influence of the United States. And we need to think about what we're doing, and we need to put in some government that realizes that we don't just loosen up for the sake of the dollar, just for income's sake. We have to think of the impact. And I think we should learn lessons from countries to ourselves that things aren't so great. And if we're going in that direction and we're following their lead, because I mean, even the politics here in Canada, it's kind of getting a little bit sad in the sense that our politicians are doing more fighting amongst each other, which is going on in the United States. Politicians are fighting each other. They don't even know how to come together to help the people. And the corporations are more in power than they've ever been because of the major money makers who influence laws now. So they have a lot of power, and we have to be careful about that. We need to keep the power with the people. And I think we're getting further away from that. So when it comes to drugs, I'm a little bit concerned that we're getting a little bit lax. So I mean, less access is simple. That's one thing. We shouldn't have it everywhere we go. We should have it in certain places, and it should be monitored, and there should be responsibility connected with that access. So, to me, like I said, marijuana is a drug like many drugs, and it impacts our young people differently. It has wonderful uses, but I think the emphasis has been on all the great things it can do. But I don't think enough emphasis has been on the negatives. So we have to make sure that we're well informed about the negatives. And we need to tell our children, our youth, that they have choice. They do not need it. Regardless how impactful they might feel it could be on their lives, we do need to let them know that they do have choice. You know, the peer pressure is going to be there, but give them choice. Tell them no. Your life is not going to necessarily be better with drugs in it. You might feel it is, but it's not necessarily so. So unless you need it, I'm kind of advocating you don't do it. Okay? All right. So be like the wise old bird and spread the word. Some good conversation, excellent information, and I want to say, take care, people.